Russia and Belarus have announced an extension to military drills near Ukraine's northern borders, as Western leaders warn of an imminent Russian invasion. Key points: NATO says Russia has 30,000 troops in Belarus and could use them as part of a force to attack Ukraine. NATO says Russia has 30,000 troops in Belarus and could use them as part of a force to attack Ukraine. Meanwhile, a Kremlin spokesman tells state TV that ongoing Western speculation could have detrimental consequences. Meanwhile, a Kremlin spokesman tells state TV that ongoing Western speculation could have detrimental consequences. He adds that Mr. Putin takes no notice of US predictions of when an invasion of Ukraine might happen. With the drills due to end on Sunday local time, Belarus Defense Minister Viktor Kremlin announced they would continue because of military activity near the borders of Russia and Belarus and an escalation of the situation in the Donbas region of eastern Ukraine. Mr. Kremlin said the focus of the extended exercises was to ensure an adequate response and de-escalation of military preparations of ill wishes near our common borders. NATO says Russia has up to 30,000 troops in Belarus and could use them as part of an invasion force to attack Ukraine, which lies to the south of Belarus. Russia continues to deny that it plans to invade Ukraine and did not comment on the drills with Belarus. On the brink of an invasion. Speaking to CNN, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said all signs suggested Russia was about to invade. Everything we are seeing suggests that this is serious, that we are on the brink of an invasion, Mr. Blinken said, adding that the West was equally prepared if Moscow invades. Until the tanks are actually rolling, and the planes are flying, we will use every opportunity, and every minute, we have to see if diplomacy can still dissuade President Vladimir Putin from carrying this forward. Mr. Blinken also defended the Biden administration's decision not to unleash sanctions on Russia ahead of a widely anticipated invasion, despite mounting criticism from Kiev and domestic rivals. Putin's government, before he invades, would just guarantee such a crisis happens immediately, US officials argue. The purpose of the sanctions in the first instance is to try to deter Russia from going to war. As soon as you trigger them, that deterrence is gone, Mr. Blinken said. Mr. Putin and his French counterpart, Emmanuel Macron, agreed in a phone call on the need for a diplomatic solution to the crisis in eastern Ukraine, both governments said. A French presidential advisor said the two agreed that a meeting of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, with representatives from Ukraine and Russia, should be held on Monday. Poland, currently the OSCE chair, earlier said that, at Ukraine's request, it was convening an extraordinary session of the Council, which is dedicated to preventing armed conflict, on Monday. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov says the West is adding to tensions with its speculation about a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Sergei Gunev, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, said the repeated warnings by the West that Russia was about to attack Ukraine were provocative and could have detrimental consequences, without giving details. Mr. Putin takes no notice of such Western statements, Mr. Peskov told Russia One State TV. The fact is that this directly leads to an increase in tension, Mr. Peskov said. The daily exercise of announcing a date for Russia to invade Ukraine is a very bad practice. Russia and its allies say Ukraine and the West are whipping up tensions by sending NATO reinforcements to Eastern Europe. Mr. Putin knows that an invasion could mean further sanctions for Russia, but he may not be deterred, Western leaders say. AP, Alexei Druzhinin. Western countries are preparing sanctions they say would be wide-reaching against Russian companies and individuals in case of an invasion. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said in a BBC interview that such sanctions would hit very, very hard and could include restrictions on Russian businesses' access to the dollar and the pound. However, he acknowledged such threats may not deter Moscow. We have to accept at the moment that Vladimir Putin is possibly thinking illogically about this and doesn't see the disaster ahead, Mr. Johnson said. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said the West should impose some of the sanctions now, rather than waiting for an invasion. Russia has to be stopped right now. "We see how events are unfolding," Mr. Kuleba said. The focus of tensions in recent days has been on the swathe of eastern Ukraine that Russian-backed rebels seized in 2014, the same year Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine. More than 14,000 people have been killed in the conflict over the past 8 years. Incidents of shelling across the line dividing government forces and separatists, which was sporadic in the past, increased sharply last week. On Sunday, explosions were heard in the center of Donetsk in the eastern Donbas region controlled by separatists. Heavy shelling was reported elsewhere in the region. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky called on Sunday for an immediate ceasefire in the region. Mr. Macron blamed the separatists for the renewed hostilities, while Mr. Putin blamed Ukraine, the French presidential advisor said. Kiev's Western allies are concerned Russia might use the escalation as a pretext for wider conflict. Thousands of people have been evacuated from the separatist-controlled regions in eastern Ukraine. Sergei Pivovarov. More than 30,000 people from Donetsk and nearby Luhansk have crossed the Russian border in the past 24 hours, TASS news agency said, quoting authorities in Russia's Rostov region. The separatists began evacuating residents on Friday, saying Ukraine was planning to attack, which Kiev denies. Local military forces in one of the separatist areas, Luhansk, said on Sunday that 2 civilians had been killed and 5 buildings damaged in shelling by the Ukraine military. Russia's investigative committee will investigate the case, the RIA news agency quoted it as saying. 2 Ukrainian soldiers were reported killed and 4 wounded on Saturday. The International Committee of the Red Cross said water services had been disrupted for more than 1 million people in the region and called on all sides to spare civilian infrastructure. With Western fears of war rising, US President Joe Biden was due to convene his top advisors to discuss the crisis. Mr. Biden said on Saturday he believed Russia could launch an attack at any time, despite assurances from the Kremlin that some troops were returning to their permanent bases after military exercises. ABC